Good. Okay. Hello, my name is Morgan Overton. My pronouns are she and her. I am a born and bred Pittsburgher. I have Hill District roots and I was raised in Penn Hills. I'm also a proud Black and Indigenous woman. My Indigenous roots stem from North Carolina, more specifically the Meherrin tribe, which is part of the Haudenosaunee, or as people may know, the Iroquois. Pretty much, I've dedicated my entire life's trajectory to racial, gender, and socioeconomic justice. I see myself as a connector to build bridges, literally in a city of bridges. We don't act like it, we tend to work in silos. So I try to bring all of the like minds together to create action. Professionally, I work in the maternal health field to combat the crisis of Black maternal health in Allegheny County. Giving birth should not be a death sentence in a most livable city. And outside of that, I'm also a visual artist, and I also serve as first vice chair of the City of Pittsburgh Gender Equity Commission. So I'm happy to be here and pass it on to the lovely Raqueeb. You're on mute, the classic phrase.
It's March. It's a year. Think I have almost a year. Hi, my name is Raqueeb Bey. I am the founder and executive director of the Black Urban Gardeners and Farmers of Pittsburgh. We're a group of Black growers who came together for sweat equity, but to also fight injustice in urban ag that white supremacy has laid on us. I am also from Pittsburgh as well. I am Black and I am Native American or Indigenous, but I don't separate the two. My grandmother was born in 1921 on a Seminole reservation in Florida. When you go down there, most of them look like us. They have hair like us. They have afros. They have locks. Not all, most of them. So I don't say like I'm Black and Indigenous. That's my personal preference. Some family members use Afro Indian. Some use Afro Native American, but the original Indigenous people were all Black here. Once again, that's another story. And like I said, I'm an urban farmer. More specifically, I'm an urban agriculturalist, which means I combine urban farming with community development and business. I've been doing this for quite a while. It's not my background. My background is finance and business, but it all has played a part. Besides farming, we we are in a movement for food sovereignty in our community because of the food apartheid area. Let's see what else. I sit on the board for Landslack Community Farm. I am a commissioner for the City of Pittsburgh Shade Tree Commission. I also am a board member for NESAW, which is Northeastern Sustainable Agricultural Working Group. So we do food justice work for the northeastern region of this territory. And let me see what else. There's other things as well. But at heart, yes, I'm a farmer, but I'm a community activist as well. And I'll pass it to Marina.
Thank you. Um, yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm Marina Lopez. I've lived in Pittsburgh for 10 years now, and I'm a musician, a composer. Um, I also am an educator, and I am volunteering at Casa San Jose, this organization that helps the Latin American immigrant community in Pittsburgh, teaching children music, and I'm using that as an opportunity to help combat some of the cultural erasure that some of these immigrants go through. Also, I've also been really interested in these themes for a long time, and I've used my music to explore them. So I'm really excited to listen to the stories that Morgan and Raqueeb have to say. It's interesting, Raqueeb, that you were talking about your identity and the way you see it, because the way I see my identity, I'm Latin American, and the way we understand our identity, we are sort of like a mix of like the white and the indigenous peoples of America. And speaking about erasure of like indigenous people and decolonization, I think sometimes the term Latino can um, it's a term that was created to sort of be an umbrella where a lot of people could share a struggle, but I think sometimes that also erases the individual struggles of like different indigenous peoples or different like Afro-Latino people. So that is something that I'm interested in exploring, and that's something that I have explored with this program that I am creating, trying to make sure that when we teach these children about the Latin American culture, that they understand that there is an African root and an indigenous root, and they see that as separate, and as they understand the nuances of it. So that's something that I've been working on.
That's wonderful. Yeah. In my culture, and this is just my culture, all life begins in Kemet, or what's known as Egypt, right? So if you look at the pyramids before the continental drift, we all know what the continental drift is. So if you look at the pyramids, you have black faces. And Kemet just means black face. You have red faces as well. So if that's the cradle of civilization, where the pyramids are millions of years old and not just 6,000 years old. That's the cradle of civilization, where all life stems from. However, I get what you're saying. I'm glad you recognize that, because there are Afro Latino. Let's take my or Puerto Rican brothers, right? So you have the Ma'afa, which means basically separating your African heritage or African Holocaust. So you got people being kidnapped as slaves all over. They didn't just come to America. They didn't just come to England or France. They were dropped off at different islands in the Caribbean, Brazil as well. So to me, we're all connected. It's just one drop off. Because if you take Puerto Rico, you have indigenous people who were in Puerto Rico, and then you had the Spaniards, right? And then you had slaves west. So I have a lot of people I know recognize that they are Afro and Afro Puerto Rican, but then some may not, because for whatever reason. It's the same with Native Americans or American Indians or indigenous people. Some will recognize that they are black, some will not for whatever reason. So in Seminole culture, we know that a lot of African slaves during slavery would run and get refuge in the Seminole reservation. Um, and here we are. So, but some people recognize it and some people don't. It depends on who you are. Because unfortunately, you have this, um, like a lot of people, because of colonization, do not want to associate themselves with their African roots. I worked with a girlfriend who, growing up, she's Latino, and her parents were from Brazil. She did not want them to speak in their Native American native language because she was embarrassed. But I've heard this from other people as well, be it Africans, Caribbeans, because we just you want to internalize. You're here being American and doing American, but you're slowly losing your culture. But that's what colonization does all over the planet. I have some friends from Sudan, and they were Muslim and had Muslim or indigenous Sudanese names. But the American Red Cross told them, look in this Bible and pick an English name so you can assimilate better within the culture of America. And they were also told that African Americans, that we weren't to be trusted. So that's part of colonization. That's part of the mind frame to get you to turn on one another. When in fact, it's an insidious root of culture, um, how the how colonization starts, and to separate it. So I can't separate myself from being Native American and being black. Um, I'm a person who I don't say people of color because I am black, I'm more, I don't use BIPOC for my own personal reasons. For so many reasons. One reason is I'm Black. I recognize myself as being Black. Two, in doing this work, that groups all of us together, where we might be trying to do this work, but all of a sudden somebody else is coming and co-opting this work as well. So I don't use those terms, BIPOC or um, people of color. I respect if that's what someone else wants to use. I'm Black. I'm Black all day, 24/7. With that being said, I've seen a lot. I've seen Seminoles who were able to get money because of their Seminoles, but if you're like now, not at least half, like my mom, then you can't do that. And that's been going on for years, even within, I have some Cherokee in me, even within those tribes, taking away medical benefits from them because they are Black. It's bananas. So
So yeah,
that's the kind of culture that goes on. Colonization isn't just like, coming over and invading land. It still happens. It's a cancer that spreads.
Mhm.
Gentrification is a form of colonization.
yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that there is no way you can separate what's going like the luxury apartment going up in East Liberty from
Mhm,
the destruction of the Hill District to create the Penn Stadium to the building of the Fort Pitt, like and the French and Indian War. It's all part of the same
Mhm.
like instinct. And until we understand that, I think until not we understand it, until the people in power understand that, I think we will just keep seeing like Black and Indigenous people suffer under
mhm,
this. There was so much you said that I found fascinating and I agree with. And I think what you're talking about, that you're not recognized as Indigenous if you don't have a certain percentage of blood. I
mhm,
mean, that's by design, right? Because
mhm,
the U.S. government doesn't want to pay Indigenous people. They want to kind of erase Indigenous people. At the same
mhm,
time, if you're just a little bit Black,
mhm,
then you are the one drop rule, then you are Black because they want more of that subservient workforce. So I think that's very important. Um, Another thing that I think about, one of the questions we were asked about Indigenous, the question of like, oh, there's no like Native American people in Pittsburgh, people saying that type of thing. I think that's doesn't take under account the fact that Native American people can move.
mhm.
um,
And it's
I
not
think,
true because there is the Three Rivers American Indian Center, which are relatives. The
Mhm,
chief or executive director, his mother and my grandfather were siblings. My grandfather was the oldest, and his mother was the youngest. So they are here,
mhm,
but it's also perception. So if
mhm,
I look at you, Marina, I see a Latino. Most people do, right?
mhm,
But if they seen a woman darker than me with an afro, she can be Latina. You never know. I do have friends who are darker than me with thicker hair than mine and a more coarse hair who are Latino. But it's a perception that we've been given. So, for instance, very long time ago on TV, you would just see light skinned Black women, even before TV, even before cinema, in performances, be it music or dance or play. It was light skinned women like myself. And there was a brown paper bag test. And normally to get on that stage, you had to be lighter than this brown paper bag, not just in the arts of music and culture of drama, but in sororities and fraternity. But that's a part of colonization where they did that to us. So, for instance, in slavery, let's put the light skinned ones in the kitchen and teach them, treat them a little better. And we'll pick the dark skinned ones in the field and treat them worse to cause animosity against each other,
mhm,
right? So you had this field slave and this house slave, and it came with mentalities that even after slavery was over, it still carried on. This is what I know. No matter what form of colonization, there was. even blacks weren't here just because of slavery. We were here even before the Mayflower, right? So no matter what happened, it had to be other Africans that sold other Africans out. Number one, we know it's because of white supremacy and what was offered to them: the gold, silk, um, diamond, liquor is one of them. To sell other indigenous people out, it had to be Native American scouts that let that happen as well. It's the same thing with gentrification. If we don't have a voice at the table, and you may have other people indigenous to this community, like I'm indigenous to the Hill District because I have lived here most of my life. So that term is broad. So you may have other people who is indigenous to this community that is okay with gentrification. They're happy with it. My simple definition of gentrification is when it's not community involved, it's unjust and unfair, and there's no community input. If it's fair redevelopment, there is community input. So say for instance, in Homewood, there's a Family Dollar. The government official never asked Homewood residents what did they want. If he would have, he would have known that they wanted a grocery store or a farmer's market, which the organization that I founded, that we're working with others to make this happen. That's a form of gentrification. And he looks like us, but we vote him in the office year after year after year. In all fairness, has there been some improvement? Yes, but not all that. So that's all I wanted to
I
share
think
for now.
this conversation is so important in the context of Pittsburgh because we know that this is a national phenomenon, right? Like we can go to Oklahoma and have the same conversation, we can go to San Francisco, but with Pittsburgh, you know, this is such a segregated city and region, especially with how we're able to identify ourselves. Like this is such a black and white city, and very rarely are we afforded the opportunity to talk about the nuances with our identity, right? That we literally just talked about for the last 10 minutes. In all of these, you know, isms and shuns, like gentrification, colonization, like that's symptomatic of these institutions of oppression, right? So I guess the larger question is like, you know, how do we perceive a decolonized Pittsburgh? And of course, these are systemic issues that aren't going to be solved overnight. But at the end of the day, if I were to envision a decolonized Pittsburgh, it would be the fact that people can actually thrive here and not have to continuously try to survive. The fact that we can, you know, actually achieve self-determination and we're not under the heels of huge corporations, UPMC, we're not being paid pennies, we're being paid sustainable wages, we're able to give birth safely, we're able to actually have access to nutritious food. Like these are basic things. They're not radical. And people think, oh, you're too progressive, you're too radical for thinking.
No, not at all.
We want basic necessities to have social mobility. And we pride ourselves on being a most livable city, but the fact is, Black people especially feel like we have to leave Pittsburgh in order to have a chance at life. So what does a decolonized Pittsburgh look to y'all? Y'all are on the ground doing this work, right? And I know you've been shouting into the streets, into elected officials' offices, people who have power. How do you leverage the people who are in pain to be closest to the power?
Thank you for sharing that and reminding me. My oldest son is 30 and my youngest child is 9. 30 years ago, we had one of the highest infant mortality rates in Pittsburgh for Black women, and nothing has changed. And I'm so glad that people like you are speaking up and there are others doing it, because we should not feel like it is a death sentence to give birth. In Pittsburgh, for what, year after year, studies come out that Black women do worse here than in any other city. But yet, as you reminded us, we're one of the most livable cities. But we know it's not for us, right?
To whom?
We
Like
know.
most livable to whom?
Exactly.
Right.
And if you never lived anywhere, or if you're not from this city and you come here and you see how it's separated, you're like, what is going here? Going on? I have relatives that come from small towns in the South and they cannot stand here because of the racial tension. So yes, there are a lot of us, boots on the ground, doing work, to make things better, but we have to hold our elected officials accountable. We know we're 70% white, right? But in the struggle, it's primarily Black people, brown people, and poor white. I fight for my people because that's what I look at when I open up my door. You know, not that we're not all in it together, but in my opinion, we have it worse than anyone. And that was set up by design. So I think a part of it is to educate folks on how to decolonize themselves, be it for land, for giving birth, to accepting people for who they are. So when I hear like a Mexican person not refer to themselves as indigenous, I'm awfully shocked because part of this is where they were. So when I hear white people who have issues like get out of my country, I'm even more taken aback. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's ignorance filled with hate, you know, and that sense of privilege, which is really just a disability. It really is. Because you have this sense of what you're entitled to, and you don't have your facts straight. You're doing anything to walk over people because you have this sense of privilege. That's why I say it's just this is really a disability. That's why it's important, like people like us, to educate on the term. So, for instance, in gentrification, when here I live in the lower hill, which is uptown, or those of us who are indigenous here, we call it Soho, right? Several years ago, I was on a board of directors for Uptown Partners, and we were awarded a nationwide neighborhood grant to build the eco district right up my alley, right? It's what I do. I was actually an environmentalist before I was an urban farmer. So everyone's happy about it. But the majority of the neighbors did not know what was going on. At the time, this was several years ago, there's out of all these people on the board, it's myself and one other Black person. And well, what are you going to do for low income people? They had all these plans for UPMC and Duquesne University, but they were leaving the low income people out. Well, we need to work with them. And it was a process, but it was a process to educate other board members. And I had to throw the word gentrification out there, and everyone got nervous because I'm a mouthpiece. And I don't have no problem going to the press, but I need to see door knocking because I know, but the majority of my neighbors who are working class did not know or working for what was going on. And one neighbor, third generation, his family came from Hungary here, built first house on our block, said no redevelopment Weaver at all. That can't happen. It's because it's going to happen. But if we have a voice at the table, we can make sure they meet some of our demands, maybe not all of them, and some of them. So it's a process of educating people. Because at first I used to think, oh my gosh, these people are out of their mind. That was years ago. And when I resigned from the board about 2 years ago, I could complain, but I had to give them credit for educating ourselves to do better for the community. Because the majority of people weren't from this community and was nouveau to this community, some of them. So education is a process and having a voice at the table as well.
Yeah, I do want to bring up that there are people in Pittsburgh that are invisible because of kind of not only because of their identity, but also because of like legal reasons. Like the undocumented population. I think it's kind of like a double thing because like even going out to a protest or even trying to exercise any sense of having a voice is dangerous. So I think that is that's a people that people like me can speak up for. But even I like have had fear about speaking up because you never know like who's watching and stuff, like this sense of paranoia. And I think especially for people like Mayan people, like people of different tribes in like southern Mexico or in different parts of Mexico, people whose first language isn't Spanish, they've migrated here, and they have the double, they have kind of like the double burden of like the erasure of being Indigenous and the genocide of being Indigenous, and at the same time they have the xenophobia of being in this country and saying that they're not part of this land, like they have more claim to this land than any person of European descent. So that's something I wanted to bring up, because I think that oftentimes they get forgotten in these conversations. I also know we were asked about what can like the universities do, like if somebody that's in that position wants to help, what could they do? I think just physically the universities are kind of, they're almost like separated, like they're in these little hills away from the rest of Pittsburgh. And like I live in a like predominantly Black neighborhood, and we're so far away from anything that has anything to do with like the university, like um and I think that if people in those universities want to make a difference or want to be involved with Pittsburgh, they have to go out of their way to reach out. I remember there was an art show from the CMU Masters of Arts last year, when there were things like art shows where you could go, and they went out of their way to find local artists to participate. And I think that's one type of thing that the universities have to do and have to do consistently, listen to the community. I also think that talking about elected officials, um, I think especially the mayor's office, they get lost in kind of like the respectability of how people ask for things. Like if the person asking for the thing, it doesn't look like, or it doesn't ask for it in the way that makes them feel comfortable, they won't accept it, or they will dismiss it. And if an elected official like is watching this or whatever, I think just going out of your way to actually listen to the people who are on the ground and doing things. I remember I think her name is Sierra from Sisters Pittsburgh, kept saying like, hey, I'm reaching out to the mayor's office again and again and again, and they do not listen to me. They are not answering my calls. That type of thing is unacceptable. The mom at Duquesne, Danielle, I remember her name, but like her son. And,
Danielle Brown. And the other one is Sierra, maybe.
yeah, it's Sierra. I don't remember her last name, but yeah, Danielle Brown, like, just been pleading with Duquesne to be able to conduct an investigation about her son's death, and they just have put out these infuriating emails about how she is not like to be trusted. And I think that shows where the actual where the priorities of these institutions lie, because yeah, they're, if somebody asks for something in any way that isn't exactly how they will accept it, or just like, yeah, they won't accept it. And I think if they really want change, the people in those positions have to be people who are willing to listen to just the grassroots people.
You pretty much hit the nail on the head with that one, because I think so often when we hear from elected officials, it's when they need our vote. When we hear from universities, it's when they need us to be a research participant for their study or for their survey about our lived experience, and then nothing is done to actually be actionable about changing it. Whenever it comes to people in power, whether it's elected officials or people who just can make decisions here, I've been sounding the alarm that they have to be students of the communities that they serve. So like you said, they have to listen. They have to include us in on the planning process. Like, what does the strategic plan look like for Pittsburgh as a whole, Allegheny County, but also when communities are being planned? A lot of people don't know about how there's 10-year plans, and then you find out about it 10 years after, right? And then you end up being gentrified. And this is all happening on Indigenous land, right? And it's just an ugly layered cake, right? And the thing is, you know, a lot of people are shut out from resources, knowing what information exists where. And that's why, you know, there needs to be more people like us in decision-making power. There needs to be more people like us running for office, being on boards, on commission, the unelected seats of power. A lot of people don't know about it, and it's a shame. And that's why I keep saying, you know, we need to break down silos to actually leverage the voices here that keep this region running, that add to the character, to the culture, to everything, or else we're going to just leave, you know? So
I
thank
agree. I agree with you to let me just say this. In Pittsburgh, the way I see it, we have more access to our politicians
yes.
compared to other cities.
Yep.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, from stories, from things that I've heard or witnesses, especially doing urban ag work, compared to like Philly, they're looking at us to help them with land initiative issues, right? And I'm thinking, oh, y'all have dollar lots there, but they're politicians. They're hard to get in touch with.
Uh-huh.
And here, like I have never had an issue with reaching out to any politicians. It might have took longer with some that look just like me, especially within city council. But being that I was, and this is before COVID, you know, sort of kind of active at one time, going to community meetings all the time, where some of them would be there. I've never had an issue with reaching out to the mayor's office either. I'm not a politician, but however, like I'm 50 and I have volunteered on various campaigns as well. So maybe that has something to do with it. But compared to other cities, we do have, we are in a space where we can see our politicians more. That doesn't mean you do not hold them accountable. We have to open up our mouths. And I know everything is politics, right? But I'm not a politician. We need to hold them accountable because we keep voting them into office, or you can't please everyone, no matter who you are, even if it's someone you voted for and they disappoint you, you just can't. So that's the start. I haven't done a protest in a very long time, maybe since Trayvon Martin, you're talking 7, 8 years. And then some people would say, well, why weren't you at this protest? Because they don't know me that well. I don't have the capacity, right? Let's say as a widowed mother, I don't have the capacity. I still have to work, but I will give back in other ways, like donating water, things like that, and having support. But my voice is different in other ways and can be utilized to help make policies because of what board I may be on or ear I may have for somebody, but it's not just me. So we got to look at this chain of where everybody fits in because this works. And if we're talking about decolonization, it comes from white supremacy. It's traumatizing. No matter if boots on the ground or you're sitting in the boardroom, it is extremely traumatizing. Most of the work I do is urban ag. I just went about a month ago through some traumatic events with some white people who, these are white people you see in Black Lives Matter movement and protests, extremely traumatized, you know, me and some other people from Bugs. Because once again, it was this privilege where you just want to take over and it's not, you just can't. And it's beyond microaggression. And it can drive a person to point to where it'll make them feel, right?
I think especially when it's supposed to be a space where
Thank you.
those ideas, it's happened. I've seen it, like spaces where people are supposed to be progressive or something, and I think they just feel like because they're in that space, they're safe to say whatever they want. And
it would have me over the years wondering, okay, this person said they're a social liberal, right? But do they really have a mega hat on at home? What are they doing here? Because of this entitlement and the microaggression. I mean, we have been on our farm where you live in Pittsburgh. It doesn't matter even if it was a black city. White people come out and volunteer more than our people. And there's so many reasons. There's multifold reasons. So for instance, they might be a trust fund baby. They may have more time. We're working 2 or 3 jobs. We're trying to raise our children. And COVID doesn't make it even easier. But aggressive with us on our own land. This is our farm. They're trying to tell us what to do as if we don't know how to farm. This is a constant conversation that I have to have with white people. If we don't know what we're doing, we will ask. But out of us, there's somebody who do know. You understand what I'm saying? Or they're under the pretense that we don't know how to farm at all. It's ridiculous.
We're not valued. Rochelle Jackson, who leads the Black Women's Policy Agenda, says that we're not valued as experts of our own experience. And what you said is that. And do y'all notice that there are like 11 nonprofits in Pittsburgh and in the region, and yet we still have these stark disparities because of what y'all were just saying? The people who lead this would have voted for Obama a third time, right? But, they think just because they're under the guise of, oh, well, my nonprofit helps, XYZ, then they're doing the work. Meanwhile, at the end of the day, you're perpetuating the oppression that you claim to be fighting against, right? And it's like, how do we even have sustainable change here when, on paper, these people seem like they're doing good work, but at the end of the day, people are still being harmed.
I think it's a lot has to do with people's egos and their kind of like sense of self. I think especially I think Bill Peduto is a perfect example of that. Like if somebody does anything that seems kind of offensive to him, he'll go on the defensive. But like even like beyond that, just everyday people that think that they're on the right side of things, and everybody can make a mistake and everybody can learn and change, and I'm always trying to do that. But I think a lot of people are just closed off to that, and there's just such a defensiveness. So yeah, I think that's a big part of people not wanting to listen to the people they're supposed to be helping.
I'm glad you brought up Rochelle's organization. She does great work. I met her through food sovereignty work on policy for Just Harvest. But even before then, I was used to utilize family support centers of Allegheny County, and she was on the policy board. She's a wonderful woman. She does a lot for our people, and particularly her work is respected. One of the questions they wanted us to ask is, what organizations do you think here in Pittsburgh have initiative or actions here in Pittsburgh do you think have already been doing some good work? And that's one organization. Monica's organization, she does great work. We want to do a garden for them, or we did talk to someone about doing a garden before the pandemic. There are many others.
Like you.
You know what? But it's not just me.
Flowers.
We do it. It's a team, right? It's a team effort.
Yes.
But I will say this. I will pat our team on the back. It didn't look like this before. We didn't have a voice at the table. I was like the only Black person at the meetings, and they're making policy for us, for Homewood and the Hill. We were being left out of grants, but that has changed. We have a voice at the table. We are there making decisions. You might not see me, but there is somebody who's working with me who's at that table making decisions. But it's still fires we have to put out. Because guess what? A lot of white people, I don't care if they are social liberals, they don't like the fact that we have a voice at the table. They don't like the fact that we have the 31,000 square foot farm that's thriving. They don't like the fact that we were doing Farm Aid. Farm Aid is a huge concert that's been going on for almost 40 years now. And it was virtual this year. And they feature 4 farms on Good Morning America. And ours was the only urban one, and it was the only Black-led one. A lot of people don't like that, But this is because of the work that we have been doing, not just here in Pittsburgh, not just in Western Pennsylvania or Pennsylvania, but regionally as well. Not by ourselves, but to break down those barriers that we as Black growers have faced. And I'm okay with that. All I could think, if you don't like it now, fuck away, because we're not done. We have a voice at the table, but we are so serious. As my brother, Dr. Raqueeb Bey, say, we need our own table now.
Yes.
We can have that. We have worked hard to get there. We okay with working with you, um, if you don't look like us or whatever. But it's time we have our own
I
table
love
because we are
that.
still putting those fires out in any sector. We're just doing it through the environment and urban ag, right?
Yes.
But it doesn't matter if it's housing, if it doesn't matter if it's maternal health, it doesn't matter if it's music, because you got to decolonize music too. I have some
Yeah.
friends, they have a brilliant lecture, colonize your music. So
Mhm.
often people say,
We all bring some uniqueness to the table that we are all collectively building outside of the status quo. And this last year, people have asked me repeatedly, like, what do I do to be part of the solution? I can't go out and protest. What should I do? Like, what is it about yourself that you can leverage a voice that is silenced in society? If you're an artist, paint a picture that, portrays lived experiences. If you write to a newsletter, write to an elected official. If you are good at mobilizing people, get the youth together in your community. Like, there are so many ways that we can each bring ourselves to the table. And you know what? We've been hearing so much like, "Oh, I can't wait to get back to normal. I can't wait to get back to normal." And we know that based off of 2020, in the last 400 years, and since 1492, that normal has never worked for us. And so we have to create our own normal, and it's gonna take time because it's systemic change, but it requires all of us to know that we are all valued as part of that change.
I agree. And you're right. You had mentioned earlier why a lot of young Black people left. My son graduated from Cheney. He got a job in Hawaii in his field. And his dad's side of the family was like, "Oh, you don't have to leave." I'm like, "Stop." I told my ex-husband, "No, you've been all over the place. His older sister did too. He can do that." And it's not my job to convince him to stay here because I didn't want to stay. Only reason I came back is because my dad got sick to help my mother take care of them. But I worry about my children growing up here. I know I have a job to do. The only reason I stayed was because of my mother. My dad died because of my mother. Then I got remarried again and I have smaller children now. Then now he passed away 2 years ago. All right, but I still know I have a job here, but I worry about my children. And people may not like this, but because of the disparities here in Pittsburgh, as a Black woman, I have 4 daughters. A white woman who can be homeless, meth out, has a better chance of success and getting more resources than me or my daughter. So I
Mhm.
worry about that. Yes, I make my own difference. I'm in a space to do that. I have a great support team, I have great family and friends, you know, but that's the reality. And if you haven't left Pittsburgh and you don't realize that it's like really screwed up here for Black women, but then we have freedom fighters like you. We have people, you mentioned Rochelle. We have Dina Free Blackwell from the House of Nana, who is our farm manager and a dear friend, definitely my sister. We have Pomai from EFOB, which stands for the farm, Indigenous Farming Family Alliance. So we got great people here in Pittsburgh who are activists and call out. We have Fawn Montgomery from Mon Valley Action Now doing great work in so many fields. We have Black people here doing criminal justice work, like Carol Beeks or Mama Uhuru, as the insiders call her. We do have great politicians,
Mhm.
that look like us, like Jake Wheatley as well.
Mhm.
And so it's just about no one can do it all. And we shouldn't
Right.
even expect that we can do it all. I was just offered to be on a national farming board. I'm like, I don't have the capacity. I'm
Yeah.
already overwhelmed. I have to homeschool now. But we need to call our politicians on it. I'm not a person to go to school board hearings anymore. Everything's virtual. But we found out recently that they wanted to close 9 public schools, and my children's school, Wolfslayer, was listed. So I had to take the time out to speak up. And at the end of my letter, the title of my letter was "Our schools are in danger, and so is your job." And
Woo!
at the end of my letter, I told them, "We voted you in the office, and we can vote you out because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that
Period.
Homewood, Westinghouse High School, even before the
Mhm.
shutdown, the children didn't have books. Come on now.
Mhm.
When you should have that every right. Our children in Homewood should have the same rights as children in Squirrel Hill. We should not want to send our children to another school district so they can have a better opportunity, But now we got some young folks out there, and I applaud them, giving them a run for their money in
Mhm.
Homewood, in on the south side. So we got to think about this. But it's also, sorry, my children and their dog. Well, anyway, um, we have to get out there and vote. I don't mean to sound like a cliche, but it's important that young people register to vote. During this last election, pardon me, I've been registered to vote since 1989, and
Mhm.
I don't know how many people knocked on my door to see if I was registered to vote. It was kind of irritating, especially with COVID, because I have like this sign, COVID
Yeah.
going on. But I applaud that because it's important. And we don't have to agree with our candidates all the time. If you're logical, you're really not. Just going out there and making a difference in your community.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times um, the glamour of protesting or the being in the moment whenever like last summer protesting was a thing everybody was doing, and it seemed like something that um, a lot of people wanted to be engaged with. I think another thing people have to be engaged with is the just voting and canvassing and all the like minutia of these little things. I think that at the end of the day adds up, maybe even more than going to a protest. So yeah, that's something that we have to keep doing, and we can't let up. We can't let the of this last election um, make us stop being vigilant and stop being engaged. I think a lot of people probably feel like, okay, like Trump's not in office anymore.
Mhm.
We're good now. And
Yeah.
no.
Because you still have the black backlash of his supporters. Now, of course, all
Mhm.
his supporters are sociopaths, you know, but some of them are out there, so we still have to remain vigilant. Not only that, um, you can't. Nobody heals overnight. You got a lot of healing to do from these last 4 years,
Mhm.
right? And I stand fast that every fight is not my fight. Um,
Mhm.
Protests are good because it gets attention. Look what happened. They raided the Capitol. It couldn't have been us. It couldn't have been black and brown people. That wall that they were scaling, it would have been blood on it. And,
Mhm.
once again, this is the difference. Um, she asked us, considering that non-citizens can't vote, how can they make sure their voice is heard? That word, like citizen, non-citizen. I don't even like the word illegal, things like that. I'm sure some people say, undocumented. But I know people who aren't citizens who do vote. I don't know how. Like if you all came and asked me, the authorities, I don't know how. But um, we make sure we don't have people like who Trump supporters into office. Um, I can't tell you about the documentation to become a citizen here, how that goes, right?
I mean,
How,
I can, yeah,
yeah,
I can talk about that. So I'm not a citizen, and I can't vote. And I know that most people who aren't citizens, like the idea of people voting illegally and stuff like that's pretty much non-existent. But what I'm doing right now, talking about it and talking to the people I know who can vote and saying like, hey, I wish I had this, I had a voice through a vote, and I wish I could exercise it, but you that can do it, because there's a lot of people like me who can't do it, and I can speak up because I don't have to worry about ICE knocking on my door. But a lot of people have to worry about that and have to worry about speaking up. And I think that's the privilege that comes from like every person who has the right to vote has a privilege over all the people who can't. And I think that's something very important. But non-citizens just being engaged with the civil process, um, getting informed and telling people about different candidates, different elections. I mean, that's what I've been doing. Just making sure my husband is registered to vote. Um, and like just nagging him about that. So that's what I've been doing.
It's the same for young people too, people who aren't yet 18. And you've I think throughout history we've seen young people be at the forefront of social movements, and so quickly they're disregarded. Um, and there are so many ways that people can get involved. You can still volunteer for a campaign if you're 16, if you're not yet a citizen, or however you wish to identify yourself. Um, there are ways that your voice can be heard. We just need people who value you and see that you matter, because at the end of the day, if we're not setting a precedent that those kinds of things um, are in access, then it sends a message that, well, you could just stay over there. We're going to keep gatekeeping over here, so we got a lot of work ahead of us, to say the least.
I agree because the young voices are often overlooked and not heard and not taken seriously, by those who are in authority, because how often do they do outreach to young people, or you even see young people running in these positions. Some older person might think, oh, they don't have experience, but you never know. I want to give one woman a shout out, young woman, Tisha Washington. She's an environmentalist and urban farmer. Does a lot of work in home, which works for one PA. That's a you know young woman who may not have the networking experience, but great ideas. You know what I mean? Wonderful ideas. And what I have learned, like even with my daughter who works closely with me, is okay, we can listen to some things, right? We have to listen. But it's not just my daughter, young people in general. I can get a mentor from anyone, older than me or younger than me. Even though I'm 50, I still need mentorship. I often call my elders and be like, what do you think about this, that, the other, and get their opinion. But young opinions from those younger than me, my children's age as well, especially the older children. But I also have to keep that fine line, like, okay, I'm just being honest with you. That's not a good idea. Because you have you can be young and have all these great ideas or think you should be doing this when you haven't paid your dues, you know. And I see that quite often. I've put bullets, not literally, but bullets to make sure those who come behind me that they don't have to go. I was held hostage on a farm, practically in central Pennsylvania, by some racist. I'll never make that mistake again. But you won't have to go through that because of the work that people in my generation and older have put us through. I often hear a term that our elders have failed us. I don't agree at all. Like, who are you talking to? Because someone had to pave the way for me to do what I'm doing right now. Someone had to pave the way for my mother, my parents, my grandparents, for them to do what they needed to do. So I think when people say our elders have failed us, they're not thinking correctly. None of us is perfect. None of us can get it all accomplished. Um, More importantly, I would say, how have we failed for you?
Mm.
I don't want no one to stay if they don't want to stay here. Like going back to that conversation, you have there is a world outside of Facebook. I encourage travel, even going outside school, outside of your city to go to your higher education university, right? But if anything, not so much as our elders have failed, but we have failed your youth. So we have to listen to what they're saying, even if, and I had to learn it, even if, it's not ridiculous, if we think it's ridiculous, rather, or to guide them. but they have to listen as well because we're not all wrong and doing everything wrong. We didn't get here overnight. The day you plant the seed is not the day you eat the fruit. So sometimes I see young people just jump in this room. Okay, you go sit down now because you're old. Like, I'm not even old. I'm only 50, right? I'm older, but I'm willing to work with you, and we can guide each other.
Yes. That's powerful. So, what does a dream Pittsburgh look like? What is the sensation of a future Pittsburgh for us all? And I alluded to this earlier, but I just want it to be a place where Black people can thrive. And people, unfortunately, believe when you advocate for one group, then that takes away from them. No, like the truth is, when you address things for the most impacted, it is a win for all. To quote Angela Davis, when Black women win victories, it is a win for virtually every segment of society. And that goes for Indigenous people too. I mean, all of these isms and forces of systemic oppression we're talking about is happening on Indigenous land. And people just think that we don't exist anymore, right? So if we honor the legacy of Indigenous people here, the strength, the resilience, and the legacy that we still embody to this day of carrying on the strength of our ancestors, not just strength to survive, but to actually thrive. That is when I see Pittsburgh actually being most livable. So I'm curious to hear what y'all think.
I think I like to see a fair and just equitable Pittsburgh, especially for Black women. And it needs to be programmed and worked not only on a grassroots level that our politicians are hearing that. Because you just did a quote by Maya Angelou, and I'm going to quote the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam. No nation can rise no higher than woman. That's it. If you're Black, brown, white, if you don't have the women there, because we are the first teachers. I'm not a feminist, however, because to me that's a European concept. I don't mean to offend any Black or brown feminists, but I'm more matriarchal. You can't get no higher than the woman. We are your first teachers from the womb on out. You in trouble? Who you calling? Your mama? All the time. I don't care what culture it is. You hurting, you in pain, you calling your mama. If you have that prerogative. So it's about getting, we need this. Because if Black women aren't doing well, nobody else is.
Nobody else is. Yeah.
Especially within our society, those that look like us. So that's what I want to see. A Pittsburgh where Black women aren't doing the worst in this country. You know how awful that is? I can go down to Atlanta and see whole neighborhoods of Black people that look like Shady Side and Point Breeze and Squirrel Hill and Sewickley, like full of Black people. So that I want to see Pittsburgh where Black women aren't doing the work, where Black women have to fear childbirth, or their children are dying in childbirth, or they are. That's what I want to see. In a livable wage for everyone.
Yeah. Oh man, a lot of things come to mind. I think like the cynical part of my brain is just like, why even think about this? But um, I'd like for different neighborhoods to have. I think neighborhoods are so segregated, and I'd like for the neighborhoods that, like in the North Side or Homewood, like all these neighborhoods to thrive the way the places that are deemed like worthy are thriving. I'd like for artists to be able to. Oh, sorry about that. I'd like to artists to be able to live in the city and make a career. I've known so many artists that leave the city, artists, musicians, creative people. The idea of making it in a tech city is just so dry and so it really kills the spirit of the city if you're just trying to make it a fancy place for people to get tech jobs. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's an amazing thing that's they've been doing for the city, but they're just leaving everybody else behind. I'd like for the history of the city to be in the forefront, for people to remember all the time what has been done to the Black community here and what's been done to Indigenous people here.
Mhm.
Um, I'd like for the Latino people to be visible and not afraid. Um, but yeah, like Pittsburgh used to be a thriving hub for jazz.
Yep.
And slowly, all these jazz clubs, all these music halls were closed before COVID, like way before COVID. They were closed. They were deemed not important. The arts weren't deemed important. And the only arts that are deemed like somewhat important is the symphony, and whoever comes into like the symphony can go on strike over $100,000 uh, uh, what's it called, a year salary, and the mayor interferes in order to help them. And I mean, I think that's great, but what happens to the rest of musicians? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I'd like to see. And mostly I'd like to see the people in power actually listen to the grassroots activists and people who are doing the work.
Yes.
Uh, I think you're silenced, Ricky.
I grew up in the Crawford Grill, so we don't have
Mhm.
historical places like that around no more. And I'm often like amazed to see young people doing jazz music because you just don't see that at all other kinds of music, right? You really don't see younger people doing jazz, and it it's part of our history and culture. I know that there are other non-black that do jazz. I have a good friend, Dr. Ben Barson. He is in Mexico right now. I mean, his wife founded a group called Afro Yaki. He is a great jazz player and musician, but that is important. We don't think about things like that, and we'll pay more attention to the NFL going on strike than what is happening to the artist. I asked my godfather, Baba Amir, how many black men visual artists was in Pittsburgh? This was just, I want to say Friday,
Mhm.
and we just lost one, and I don't think we got past a dozen. And then I said,
Mhm.
how many black women? And of course, you were named Morgan, and maybe like 5 or 6 others that we could think of, visual artists. And it's like, it wasn't like that when I grew up, you
Yeah.
know? And I think you're one of the youngest that I know. But
Oh.
that we know of. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's important.